a kingdom of guns and guilt. Aurora Darasi had spent years pretending she didn't know the truth. But when she uncovered a secret she was never meant to find, she did the only thing she could. She ran. And now, standing in her doorway, was the man sent to bring her back. Tommaso Benedetti's voice was smooth as silk. "You should have known better, Dolcezza," he murmured. "No one escapes me." Chapter 1. The Whispers of the Past Return. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Florentine rooftops, painting the terracotta tiles in hues of burnt orange and deep rose. Aurora Darasi stood on the small balcony of her apartment, a gentle breeze ruffling the edges of her silk scarf, the scent of jasmine and distant wood smoke filling the air. It had been 5 years since she'd last stood in this city, 5 years since she'd walked away from the life she was born into, the life she'd desperately tried to escape. 5 years of carefully constructed anonymity, of building a new identity, a new life, as far removed from the suffocating opulence and veiled threats of the Darasi family as she could manage. She'd become Anna, a quiet, unassuming restorer of antique books, her days filled with the delicate scent of aged paper and leather, her nights spent in the peaceful solitude of her modest apartment overlooking a quiet piazza. The roar of the city, the constant hum of whispered secrets and ancient vendettas, had faded into a distant, almost forgotten dream. Or so she'd thought. The discovery had been accidental, a misplaced letter tucked within the pages of a centuries-old prayer book she was rebinding. A letter bearing the unmistakable crest of the Darasi family, a coiled serpent clutching a dagger, a symbol she'd seen etched into silverware, embroidered onto tapestries, and imprinted on her very soul since childhood. The words, penned in her father's elegant, spidery script, had chilled her to the bone. A casual mention of a necessary sacrifice, a loose end that needed to be dealt with. A name, Elena, a name that echoed with a faint, haunting familiarity. Aurora had spent weeks agonizing over the letter, her carefully constructed piece shattering into a million fragments.
Elena.
She'd known an Elena, a childhood friend, a girl with laughter like wind chimes and eyes the color of the summer sky. Elena, who had disappeared without a trace when they were both 15. The official story was that she'd run away with a traveling musician, a narrative Aurora had never fully believed. Now, holding this brittle piece of paper, the truth felt cold and inescapable. Her father, Don Alessandro Darasi, the man she'd both loved and feared, the man who ruled their family with an iron fist disguised in a velvet glove, had been involved. She didn't know the details, didn't want to know, but the implication was clear. Elena hadn't run away. She'd been silenced. And Aurora, by uncovering this secret, had unwittingly placed herself in the same perilous position. She'd known, with a chilling certainty, that she couldn't stay. She'd packed a small bag, leaving behind most of her belongings, her carefully curated life, the illusion of safety she'd so meticulously built. She'd booked a train ticket, not to another city, but to another country, to a remote village in the Swiss Alps where she hoped to disappear completely. But she hadn't made it. The knock on her door had been soft, almost hesitant, a stark contrast to the pounding of her heart. She'd hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob, a sense of dread coiling in her stomach. She'd known, even before she opened the door, that her escape had been thwarted. He stood there, silhouetted against the fading light, a figure both familiar and terrifying. Tommaso Benedetti, her father's right-hand man, the enforcer, the shadow that always seemed to lurk just beyond the periphery of her vision. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders broader, his presence filling the doorway, blocking out the last rays of the setting sun. His face, though still strikingly handsome, was etched with lines of weariness and a hint of something that might have been regret. His dark eyes, usually cold and calculating, held a flicker of something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. He hadn't aged as gracefully as she had hoped. The years, she supposed, weighed heavily on everyone, even those who dealt in darkness. There were streaks of silver in his dark hair, framing a face that had seen too much, felt too much, perhaps even regretted too much. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, the fabric expensive, the cut flawless, a stark contrast to the simple, worn clothes she now favored. The only visible sign of his true allegiance was the small, silver serpent pin on his lapel, the Darasi crest glinting ominously in the dim light. "Aurora," he'd said, his voice a low rumble, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. It wasn't a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement of the inevitable. She tried to feign ignorance, to pretend she was Anna, the book restorer, the woman he'd mistaken her for. But the look in his eyes, a mixture of pity and unwavering determination, had told her it was futile. "Don't," he'd said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "Don't insult either of us by pretending." He'd stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click that echoed the finality of her situation. The small apartment, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The scent of jasmine from the balcony was overpowered by the subtle, expensive cologne he wore, a scent that was both alluring and menacing. It was a scent she remembered from her childhood, the scent that always lingered in the air after Tommaso had visited her father, the scent that had always signaled a shift in the atmosphere, a tightening of the reins, a reminder of the power that held their lives in its grip. He hadn't touched her, hadn't threatened her, hadn't even raised his voice. But the air crackled with unspoken tension, with the weight of years of secrets and unspoken truths. "You should have known better, Dulcezza," he murmured, his voice smooth as silk, a stark contrast to the steel in his eyes. "No one escapes me." The endearment, Dulcezza, felt like a mockery, a cruel reminder of the world she'd tried to leave behind, a world where affection was often a weapon, where words were carefully chosen, and where silence came at a steep price. He took a step closer, and she instinctively recoiled, pressing herself against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. The fading light caught the angles of his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the slight stubble that darkened his skin, the faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a memento of a past she didn't want to imagine. He was a predator, and she was his prey, trapped, cornered, with nowhere left to run. And yet, there was something in his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability, a hint of sadness, that made her pause. It was a fleeting glimpse, quickly masked, but it was there. And it was that fleeting glimpse that made her wonder, for the first time, if Tommaso Benedetti was as much a prisoner of the Darasi family as she was. It would be a fatal mistake, a foolish notion. She had been down that road before. He reached out, not to grab her, but to gently brush a stray strand of hair from her forehead. The touch, unexpectedly tender, sent a jolt of electricity through her, a confusing mix of fear and something else, something she hadn't felt in years, something she thought she'd buried deep within her heart. Something akin to longing. A very, very dangerous longing. She had to think, to plan, to somehow find a way out of this. But her mind was a whirl of confusion, a chaotic storm of fear and a surprising, unsettling awareness of the man standing before her. He was her captor, her enemy, the embodiment of everything she'd tried to escape. And yet. Chapter 2. Shadows lengthen on cobblestone streets. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the city, the rumble of a passing Vespa, the melodic chime of a church bell, the faint strains of an opera singer practicing scales. Aurora forced herself to meet Tommaso's gaze, refusing to show the fear that clawed at her throat. She had learned, over the years, that fear was a weakness, a vulnerability that could be exploited. And in the world she came from, weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. Tommaso didn't answer immediately. He simply studied her, his dark eyes searching, probing, as if trying to decipher the secrets hidden behind her carefully constructed facade. He moved away from the door, towards the small balcony, his movements fluid and graceful, like a panther stalking its prey. He leaned against the railing, the wrought iron intricate against the backdrop of the darkening sky. "Your father wants you home," He finally said, his voice devoid of emotion, a simple statement of fact. Home? Aurora scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. That place was never my home. It was a prison, a gilded cage where I was expected to be seen and not heard, a pawn in my father's twisted games. Tommaso turned to face her, his expression unreadable.
You knew the rules, Aurora. You were born into this life.
There is no escape. There's always a choice, she countered, her voice rising slightly. I chose to leave. I chose to build a life of my own, a life free from the lies and the violence. And where did that get you? He asked, his voice laced with a hint of cynicism. Hiding in a cramped apartment, pretending to be someone you're not? Living in constant fear of being discovered? His words struck a nerve, a raw, exposed nerve that she'd tried so hard to protect. He was right, of course. Her life of freedom had been an illusion, a fragile construct built on a foundation of fear. But it was her illusion, her choice. And she'd cling to it, even now, even as it crumbled around her. It was better than the alternative, she said quietly, her gaze dropping to the worn floorboards. Tommaso sighed, a sound of weary resignation. Perhaps, he conceded, but it's over now. Your father wants to see you.
He's not a well man, Aurora. He needs you.
The mention of her father's ill health sent a pang of guilt through her. Despite everything, despite the fear and the resentment, she still loved him. It was a complicated, conflicted love, tainted by years of manipulation and control, but it was love nonetheless. She had pictured him many times, older, yes, but still full of that dark power. It hurt to discover reality did not mirror that image. What's wrong with him? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tommaso hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. It's his heart, he said finally. He's had a few episodes. The doctors say he doesn't have much time. Aurora felt a knot tighten in her chest. She'd always known this day would come, the day when her father's iron grip on life would finally loosen. But she hadn't expected it to feel like this, like a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless and reeling. I need to think, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Tommaso nodded, his expression softening slightly. I understand, but we don't have much time. We need to leave tonight. Tonight? She repeated, her mind racing. But I have things to do. I have responsibilities. He shook his head. Nothing that can't wait. Your father's health is precarious. He wants to see you, Aurora. Before it's too late. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. She knew he wasn't lying. Her father was dying, and he wanted to see her. The thought was both terrifying and strangely compelling. She'd spent years running from him, from the life he represented. But now, faced with the reality of his mortality, she felt a pull, a sense of obligation, a need to see him one last time. I need to pack a bag, she said, her voice resigned. Tommaso nodded. I'll wait outside, he said, turning to leave. He paused at the doorway, his hand resting on the frame. He looked back at her, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. He truly does miss you, Aurora, he said quietly. He may not always show it, but he loves you. In his own way. And with that, he was gone, leaving her alone in the silence of her apartment, the shadows lengthening around her, the whispers of the past swirling around her like a gathering storm. The city outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching, as she made the decision that would change her life forever. She looked around the small room, at the books she'd so lovingly restored, at the few personal belongings she'd accumulated, at the life she'd so carefully constructed. It was a fragile life, a temporary life, but it was hers. And now, she was being forced to leave it behind, to return to the world she'd so desperately tried to escape. A world of shadows and secrets, of lies and betrayals, of a love that was both a blessing and a curse. She walked over to the window, gazing out at the darkening sky, the first stars beginning to appear, twinkling like distant diamonds. She had a choice to make. She could refuse, fight, try to run again. But she knew it was futile. Tommaso would find her, he always did. And even if she did manage to escape, she would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, living in constant fear. Or she could go back, face her father, confront the past, and perhaps, finally, find some semblance of peace. It was a dangerous path, a path fraught with uncertainty and peril. But it was also a path that might lead to closure, to forgiveness, to a chance to finally understand the secrets that had haunted her for so long. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made her choice. She would go back. Not for her father, not for Tommaso, but for herself, for Elena, and for the woman she hoped to become. The flicker of a street lamp below illuminated a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, a tear that held the weight of years of silence, of fear, of a love that refused to die. The cobblestone streets below seemed to beckon, promising both danger and a strange, unsettling kind of homecoming. Chapter 3. A Gilded Cage, a Hidden Truth. The drive back to the De Rossi estate was a silent one, the tension in the car thick enough to cut with a knife. Aurora sat in the back seat, staring out the window at the passing landscape, the familiar sights of her childhood blurring into a meaningless kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. Tommaso drove with a quiet intensity, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes focused on the road ahead. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd left Florence, his silence more unsettling than any threat. The car, a sleek, black Maserati, was a stark reminder of the world she was returning to, a world of opulence and power, a world where appearances were everything. She'd grown accustomed to the simplicity of her life in Florence, to the anonymity of blending in with the crowd. Now, she felt exposed, vulnerable, like a butterfly pinned to a display board. She tried to focus on the details, on the feel of the leather seat beneath her, on the smooth purr of the engine, on the faint scent of Tommaso's cologne that still lingered in the air. Anything to distract herself from the knot of anxiety that was tightening in her stomach. As they approached the estate, the landscape shifted from urban sprawl to rolling hills dotted with vineyards and olive groves. The air grew cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The road narrowed, winding its way through a dense forest, the trees forming a dark, impenetrable wall on either side. The gates of the estate loomed ahead, tall and imposing, wrought iron intricately crafted into the familiar coiled serpent motif. The gates swung open silently, revealing a long, winding driveway lined with ancient cypress trees, their dark silhouettes reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. Aurora felt a shiver run down her spine. The estate, a sprawling, centuries-old palazzo, had always felt more like a prison than a home. Its imposing facade, its vast, echoing halls, its countless rooms filled with priceless antiques and hidden secrets had always suffocating her. The car pulled up to the front entrance, a grand, imposing portico supported by massive stone columns. Two uniformed guards stood at attention, their faces impassive, their eyes betraying nothing. Tommaso got out of the car and opened the back door for her, his movements stiff and formal. "Welcome back, Signorina De Rossi," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Aurora stepped out of the car, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. She looked up at the palazzo, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light, a stark contrast to the coldness she felt inside. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but it was a beauty that held a dark, sinister undercurrent. A woman emerged from the front entrance, her footsteps echoing on the stone steps. It was Isabella, the family's longtime housekeeper, her face etched with lines of worry and a hint of relief. "Aurora," Isabella said, her voice warm and welcoming. "We've been expecting you." Isabella had been a constant presence in Aurora's life, a surrogate mother figure in a world where genuine affection was a rare commodity. She'd always been kind to Aurora, offering her a refuge from the coldness of her father and the suffocating expectations of her family. "Isabella," Aurora replied, managing a small smile. "It's good to see you." Isabella embraced her, her hug warm and comforting. "Your father is waiting for you," she said, her voice low and discreet. He's in his study. The study. The heart of the Darasi Empire. The room where all the important decisions were made. The room where secrets were whispered and deals were struck. Aurora felt a sense of dread wash over her. She hadn't been in that room since she'd left, since she defied her father and walked away from her life. Tommaso led the way, his presence a silent, watchful shadow. They walked through the grand entrance hall, its marble floors polished to a mirror sheen, its walls adorned with priceless paintings and tapestries. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, beeswax, and the faint, lingering aroma of her father's favorite cigars. They reached the study, a massive oak door with intricate carvings, the coiled serpent crest prominently displayed. Tommaso knocked softly, then opened the door, stepping aside to allow Aurora to enter. The room was dimly lit, the only light source coming from a fire crackling in the massive fireplace and a single desk lamp illuminating a large, mahogany desk. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with leather-bound volumes, their titles glinting gold in the flickering light. The air was heavy with the scent of old books, cigar smoke, and something else, something indefinable, something that spoke of power and secrets. Her father, Don Alessandro Darasi, sat in a large, leather armchair behind the desk, his back to the door. He was smaller than she remembered, his once imposing frame now shrunken and frail. His shoulders were slumped, his head bowed, his hands resting on the arms of the chair, his fingers gnarled and twisted with age. "Father?" Aurora said softly, her voice trembling slightly. He slowly turned, his movements stiff and labored. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes sunken and hollow, his once sharp features now softened by age and illness. But his gaze was still intense, still piercing, still holding that spark of power that had always commanded respect and fear. "Aurora," he said, his voice raspy and weak. "You came." It wasn't a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement of her presence. He gestured towards a chair opposite the desk, his hand trembling slightly. "Sit," he commanded, his voice regaining a hint of its former authority. Aurora sat down, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at her father, really looked at him for the first time in years. He was a shell of his former self, a broken man clinging to the last vestiges of his power. And yet, she still felt that familiar mixture of fear and respect, that sense of obligation, that unspoken bond that tied them together. She was his daughter. He was her father. For better or worse. "I received your letter," he was saying, his words labored. "The one you found." Aurora was stunned. "How?" He waved a dismissive hand. "I have eyes everywhere, Kara. Even after all these years." He took a moment to compose himself, then continued, each word an effort.
"Elena, it was necessary."
A threat to the family. She was a child. Aurora protested, horrified. Alessandro closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were filled with an ancient weariness. Sometimes, Dulcezza, the hardest choices are the ones that must be made. For the good of the family. For the continuation of our legacy. He coughed, a rattling sound that shook his frail frame. "I did what I had to do." "And Tommaso?" He met her eyes. "He is loyal. He understands the price of silence. As you must learn to again." The fire crackled in the silence, its light revealing a small, framed photograph on the desk, a photograph Aurora hadn't noticed before. It was a picture of her and Elena, taken when they were children, their arms around each other, their faces beaming with carefree joy. A hidden truth, displayed in plain sight, a testament to a past that could never be erased, a past that had finally caught up with them both. The weight of it all threatened to crush her, the years of pretending, the guilt, the fear, and the sudden, overwhelming realization that her father, despite everything, had kept that photograph, a reminder of the girl he had ordered silenced, a reminder of the cost of his power. He held out a small, velvet box towards her. She couldn't quite make out what was inside. Chapter 4. The Scent of Betrayal and Old Leather. Aurora hesitated, her hand hovering over the velvet box. It was small, almost delicate, a stark contrast to the heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the study. The dark red velvet seemed to absorb the flickering firelight, making it appear almost black, a void in the dimly lit room. She looked at her father, his face etched with a mixture of pain and expectation, his eyes pleading with her to accept this offering, whatever it was. She slowly reached out and took the box, her fingers brushing against his. His skin was cold and dry, like parchment, a chilling reminder of his failing health. She opened the box, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, lay a single, antique key. It was made of heavy, tarnished silver, its intricate design worn smooth with age. It wasn't just any key, she recognized it instantly. It was the key to the small, locked room at the top of the North Tower. A room she hadn't been allowed to enter since she was a child. A room that held a secret she'd always suspected but never dared to confront. What is this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alessandro's gaze was fixed on the key, his expression unreadable. The truth, he said, his voice raspy and weak. The truth about Elena. The truth about everything. Aurora's mind raced. The North Tower room. She'd always been curious about it, drawn to its mystery, its forbidden nature. She'd often snuck up to the tower as a child, pressing her ear against the locked door, trying to hear what was inside. She'd imagined all sorts of things, treasures, secrets, perhaps even a ghost. But she'd never been able to get inside. The key had always been kept hidden, guarded by her father as carefully as any of his other precious possessions. Now he was giving it to her. The key to the past, the key to the truth. But what truth? And why now, after all these years? I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Alessandro sighed, a sound of weary resignation. There are things you don't know, Aurora, he said. Things I couldn't tell you, things I had to protect you from. But now it's time for you to know the truth. The whole truth. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes closing for a moment, as if gathering his strength. Elena, she wasn't just a friend, Aurora, he said, his voice barely audible. She was your sister. Aurora felt a jolt of shock, a wave of disbelief washing over her. Her sister?
Elena?
It couldn't be true. It was impossible. She would have known. Someone would have told her. That's not possible, she stammered. I would have known. Alessandro opened his eyes, his gaze piercing.
No, he said.
You wouldn't have. It was a secret, a carefully guarded secret. Your mother, she had an affair. With Elena's father. A man I trusted. A man I considered a friend. He betrayed me. And your mother, she paid the price. Aurora felt a cold dread creeping into her heart. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alessandro's gaze shifted to the fireplace, his eyes fixated on the dancing flames. Your mother, she died giving birth to Elena, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I couldn't bear the thought of raising another man's child. But I couldn't abandon her either. She was innocent. So I arranged for her to be raised in secret by a trusted family. I told everyone she had died, including you. Aurora felt numb, her mind struggling to process this information. Her mother, dead. Elena, her sister. A secret hidden for years, a lie that had shaped her entire life. But why tell me now? She asked, her voice shaking. Alessandro looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. Because I'm dying, Aurora, he said. And I don't want to take this secret to my grave. You deserve to know the truth. And I need you to do something for me. What? She asked, her voice barely audible. The room, he said, gesturing towards the key in her hand. The North Tower room. There are documents. Letters. Things that will explain everything. Things that need to be dealt with. Dealt with? She repeated, her mind racing. What do you mean? Alessandro hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. There are enemies, Aurora, he said. People who would use this information against us, against the family. The documents, they need to be destroyed. Before they fall into the wrong hands. Aurora felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Destroyed? What kind of documents? What kind of secrets? She looked at the key in her hand, the key to the North Tower room, the key to the past. It was heavy, cold, a burden of truth and responsibility. Tommaso, who had been standing silently by the door, stepped forward. "I can take care of it, Don Alessandro," he said, his voice low and respectful. Alessandro shook his head. "No, Tommaso," he said. "This is something Aurora must do. It's her legacy, her responsibility." He looked at Aurora, his eyes pleading. "Promise me, Aurora," he said. "Promise me you'll destroy the documents. Protect the family. Protect your sister's memory." The scent of old leather and the faint, lingering aroma of cigar smoke seemed to intensify, filling the room with a suffocating weight. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, shadows that seemed to twist and writhe, like the secrets that were slowly being revealed. Aurora looked at her father, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. She looked at Tommaso, his expression unreadable, his presence a silent, watchful shadow. And she looked at the key in her hand, the key to the truth, the key to a past she never knew existed. The weight of his request, the weight of her family's legacy, pressed down on her, heavy and inescapable. Her fingers tightened around the cold metal of the key. A decision had to be made, and it was hers alone to make. The air hung heavy, the silence punctuated only by the crackling fire, as she weighed the promise she was about to make, a promise that would bind her to this world, to this family, to a past she was only beginning to understand. She couldn't possibly know what this promise would bring. Chapter 5. Echoes in the Empty Palazzo. The North Tower stood sentinel against the night sky, a dark, imposing silhouette against the backdrop of a moonless night. Aurora climbed the winding stone staircase, the cold air seeping through the narrow windows, chilling her to the bone. The key felt heavy in her hand, a tangible representation of the burden she now carried. Each step echoed in the silence, the sound amplifying the sense of isolation and unease that filled her. The palazzo felt different at night, its grandeur muted, its secrets amplified. The familiar sounds of the daytime, the bustling activity of the staff, the distant murmur of voices, were replaced by an eerie stillness, broken only by the creaking of old wood and the whisper of the wind through the ancient stones. She reached the top of the staircase, her breath catching in her throat. The door to the North Tower room stood before her, dark and imposing, its wood aged and weathered, the iron lock rusty and forbidding. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the keyhole, a sense of dread washing over her. What awaited her behind this door? What secrets would be revealed? She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a grating sound, the mechanism stiff and resistant, as if protesting the intrusion after years of silence. She pushed the door open, a cloud of dust swirling around her, the scent of mildew and decay filling the air. The room was small and circular, its walls lined with shelves filled with dusty books and forgotten objects. A single, narrow window offered a panoramic view of the estate, the moonlit landscape stretching out before her like a vast, undulating sea. The air was cold and stale, untouched by sunlight or fresh air for years. In the center of the room stood a small, wooden desk, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. A single, leather-bound journal lay open on the desk, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. Aurora approached the desk, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached out and touched the journal, her fingers tracing the faded gold lettering on the cover. Elena, it read, in a delicate, spidery script. She carefully picked up the journal, its pages fragile and delicate, and began to read. The words were written in Italian, in a handwriting that was both familiar and foreign. It was Elena's voice, her thoughts, her feelings, her secrets, preserved in this forgotten room. As she read, Aurora was transported back in time, to a world she had never known, a world of stolen moments, hidden affections, and forbidden love. Elena wrote of her life, of her longing for a mother she had never known, of her friendship with Aurora, a friendship that was both a source of joy and a painful reminder of the secret that separated them. She wrote of her father, the man who had betrayed Don Alessandro, the man who had loved her mother, the man who had been forced to give up his daughter to protect her from his enemy's wrath. She wrote of her dreams, her hopes, her fears, her growing awareness of the dangerous world she inhabited. And then the entry stopped.
Abruptly.
Without explanation, Aurora felt a chill run down her spine. The last entry was dated just days before Elena's disappearance. She had written of a meeting, a secret rendezvous, a plan to escape, to run away with the man she loved. A man whose name was never mentioned. Aurora closed the journal, her hands trembling. Elena hadn't run away. She'd been planning to, but something had happened. Something had prevented her from escaping. Something or someone. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the shelves, searching for answers. There were other journals, other documents, boxes filled with letters, photographs, and forgotten mementos. A lifetime of secrets, hidden in this forgotten room. She began to explore, carefully opening boxes, sifting through papers, her mind racing, trying to piece together the puzzle of Elena's life, of her death, of the truth that her father had so carefully concealed. She found letters from Elena's father, filled with love and longing, with pleas for forgiveness, with promises to protect her, to keep her safe. She found photographs of Elena, of her mother, of the man who had fathered them both. She found documents detailing financial transactions, secret agreements, hidden alliances. And then she found it, tucked away in a small, wooden box, hidden beneath a pile of old letters. She found a single, folded piece of paper. It was a letter, written in her father's handwriting, the same elegant, spidery script she had seen in the letters she'd found in Florence. But this letter was different. This letter was addressed to Tommaso Benedetti. Aurora's heart skipped a beat. Tommaso? What did he have to do with this? She unfolded the letter, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold it. The words were stark, brutal, a chilling testament to her father's ruthlessness. "The girl knows too much," the letter read. "She's becoming a liability. Eliminate her. Make it look like an accident. And make sure there are no loose ends. No one can know the truth. Especially Aurora." Aurora felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Her father had ordered Elena's death, and Tommaso had carried out the order. The room seemed to spin around her, the walls closing in, the air thick with the scent of betrayal and decay. She stumbled back, her legs giving way beneath her, collapsing onto the floor, the letter slipping from her grasp. Tommaso, the man she had trusted, the man who had protected her, the man who had claimed to care for her father, for her. He was a murderer. He had killed her sister. And he had lied to her, to everyone. The echoes of the empty palazzo seemed to mock her, whispering secrets she didn't want to hear, revealing truths she couldn't bear to face. She was trapped, surrounded by lies, by betrayal, by a past that refused to stay buried. She looked down and saw the key on the floor next to her, shining dimly. A key that opened up so much more than a dusty room. And in the distance, she heard the faint sound of a car approaching, its headlights cutting through the darkness, bringing with it the man who held the key to her destruction, to her salvation, to her future. A future she no longer understood. A very familiar black, sleek Maserati. Chapter 6. A dance of deception and desire. The sound of the car door slamming shut echoed through the silent palazzo, each footstep on the gravel driveway a hammer blow against Aurora's already shattered composure. She quickly gathered the letter and Elena's journal, shoving them into the deep pockets of her coat. Her hands were shaking, her mind racing, trying to formulate a plan, a strategy, anything to keep her one step ahead of the man who was now ascending the stairs. She had to appear calm, collected, unsuspecting. She had to pretend that she hadn't discovered the truth, that she was still the naive, obedient daughter Tommaso believed her to be. It was a dangerous game, a dance of deception, but it was the only way to survive. She stood up, brushing the dust from her clothes, forcing herself to take deep, calming breaths. She positioned herself near the window, feigning interest in the moonlit landscape, her back to the door, giving her a few precious seconds to compose herself before he entered. The door creaked open, and Tommaso stepped inside, his silhouette framed against the dim light of the hallway. He closed the door behind him, the click of the lock echoing in the silence, sealing them both in this room of secrets. "Aurora," he said, his voice low and smooth, the same voice that had both soothed and terrified her since childhood. "I was worried. You've been up here a long time." She turned to face him, forcing a smile, a mask of innocence to hide the turmoil within. "Just looking around," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It's been a while." He approached her, his eyes searching, probing, trying to gauge her mood, her reaction. He stopped a few feet away, his presence filling the small room, his scent, that familiar blend of expensive cologne and something darker, something indefinable, filling her senses. "Find anything interesting?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of suspicion. "Just memories," she said, shrugging nonchalantly. "Old books, dusty photographs. Nothing of importance." She gestured towards the shelves, towards the scattered objects, trying to appear casual, unconcerned. She had to play the part, to convince him that she was still in the dark, that she hadn't uncovered the truth. He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on her face, his eyes narrowed slightly. He was trying to read her, to see through her facade, to detect any hint of deception. She met his gaze, refusing to look away, holding his stare, challenging him silently. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, the tension between them palpable. The air crackled with unspoken words, with hidden truths, with the dangerous game they were playing. "Your father is asking for you," he said finally, breaking the silence. "He wants to talk." "About what?" she asked, feigning innocence. He shrugged.
He didn't say.
But he seemed agitated. "He wants to see you immediately." Aurora felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Agitated? What had triggered that? Had he somehow sensed her discovery? Had Tommaso told him something? She had to be careful, to tread lightly, to avoid arousing any further suspicion. "I'll go see him," she said, her voice calm and measured. She moved towards the door, but Tommaso blocked her path. He stood there, tall and imposing, his body a barrier between her and escape. "Aurora," he said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "Is everything all right?" It was a loaded question, a test. He was probing, searching for any sign of weakness, any indication that she knew the truth. She had to be strong, to maintain the charade, to play the game. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "Why wouldn't it be?" He reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. The touch, unexpectedly tender, sent a jolt of electricity through her, a confusing mix of fear and something else, something she hadn't felt in years, something she thought she'd buried deep within her heart. The same unsettling longing from before. "You seem different," he said, his voice low and husky. Distant. She pulled her arm away, breaking the contact, fighting the urge to recoil from his touch. "I'm just tired," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's been a long day." He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on her face, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and something else, something darker, something she couldn't quite decipher. It was a look that both intrigued and terrified her, a look that spoke of a hidden desire, a forbidden attraction. "Don't lie to me, Aurora," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know you better than you think." His words sent a shiver down her spine. He knew. He had to know. But how much? And what would he do with that knowledge? She forced herself to meet his gaze, to hold his stare, to challenge him once again. "I have nothing to lie about," she said, her voice firm, her eyes unwavering. He studied her for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped aside, allowing her to pass. "Go see your father," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "He's waiting." Aurora walked past him, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. She had survived this encounter, but the game was far from over. She was trapped in a web of deception, caught between a dying father and a murderous lover, a dance of desire and betrayal that could only end in tragedy. As she descended the stairs, she knew one thing for certain. She could trust no one, especially not Tommaso Benedetti. The air in the hallway felt colder, the shadows deeper, as she made her way towards her father's study, each step taking her closer to a confrontation she couldn't avoid, a confrontation that would reveal the true depths of her family's darkness and the true cost of her own silence. She could feel the weight of the journal and letter in her pocket, a constant reminder of the secret she now carried, a secret that could destroy them all. Chapter 7. The Weight of Unspoken Promises. The study was even dimmer than before, the fire having burned down to glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Alessandro was slumped in his armchair, his head resting on his chest, his breathing shallow and ragged. Aurora approached him cautiously, her heart aching at the sight of his frail, weakened state. "Father?" she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. He stirred, his eyes slowly opening, focusing on her with difficulty. He looked even more pale and drawn than before, his skin almost translucent, his eyes sunken and hollow. "Aurora," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "You found it?" He was referring to the documents, to the secrets hidden in the North Tower room. She hesitated, unsure of how to answer. She couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. She needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what to do, with the devastating knowledge she now possessed. "Yes," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I found some old papers. Nothing of importance." It was a lie, a necessary lie, but it felt heavy on her tongue, a betrayal of the trust he had placed in her, however misplaced that trust might be. Alessandro's eyes searched hers, trying to gauge her honesty, to see through her facade. He was weak, dying, but he still possessed that sharp, penetrating gaze that had always intimidated her. You promised," he whispered, his voice strained. "You promised to protect the family." The weight of that unspoken promise, the promise she had made earlier, pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She had promised to destroy the documents, to protect the family secrets, to perpetuate the cycle of lies and violence. But now, knowing the truth, knowing that her father had ordered the death of her own sister, could she keep that promise? I will," she said, her voice faltering slightly. It was another lie, a lie that felt even heavier than the first. She couldn't destroy the documents, not now. They were the only evidence of Elena's life, of her death, of the truth that had been hidden for so long. She needed to protect them, to find a way to use them, to expose the truth, to bring justice to her sister. Alessandro seemed to relax slightly, his body slumping further into the chair, his eyes closing again. "Good," he whispered. "Good, my daughter. My legacy." His breathing grew even shallower, his chest barely rising and falling. Aurora felt a surge of panic. He was slipping away, fading before her eyes. "Father?" she said, her voice rising in alarm. "Father, stay with me." She reached out and took his hand, his skin cold and clammy. She squeezed it gently, trying to instill some warmth, some life, back into his frail body. He opened his eyes, focusing on her with a desperate intensity. "Tommaso," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Trust Tommaso." His words sent a chill down her spine. Trust Tommaso? The man who had murdered her sister? The man who had lied to her, manipulated her, betrayed her? It was impossible. It was madness. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I can't." Alessandro's grip on her hand tightened, his eyes pleading. He will protect you," he whispered. "He loves you." Loves her? The thought was both absurd and terrifying. Tommaso's love was a dangerous, possessive love, a love that demanded obedience, loyalty, silence. It was a love that could destroy her. "He killed Elena," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "He killed my sister." Alessandro's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, of confusion, crossing his face. "No," he whispered. He tried to say more, but his breath caught in his throat, a rattling sound that filled the silence. His grip on her hand loosened, his eyes staring blankly ahead, his body going limp. "Father," Aurora cried, her voice filled with anguish. She shook him gently, desperately, but there was no response. He was gone. She sat there, numb with shock, her father's lifeless hand in hers, the silence of the study pressing down on her, heavy and suffocating. The weight of unspoken promises, of lies and betrayals, of a love that was both a blessing and a curse, seemed to crush her. She looked around the room, at the flickering embers in the fireplace, at the shadows dancing on the walls, at the leather-bound books lining the shelves, each one a testament to a legacy of power and secrets. A legacy that was now hers. She slowly stood up, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. She walked over to the desk, her gaze falling on the photograph of her and Elena, their smiling faces a stark reminder of the innocence that had been lost, of the life that had been stolen. She picked up the photograph, her fingers tracing the outlines of their faces, her heart aching with a grief she had never allowed herself to feel. She had to do something. She had to find a way to honor Elena's memory, to expose the truth, to break the cycle of violence and silence. But her mind was a blank on how to do it. She heard a sound behind her, a soft footstep on the carpet. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest, expecting to see Tommaso, expecting to face his deception, his betrayal. But it wasn't Tommaso. It was Isabella, the housekeeper, her face etched with lines of worry and grief. "Signorina Aurora," Isabella said softly, her voice trembling.
He's gone."
Aurora nodded, unable to speak, tears streaming down her face. Isabella approached her, embracing her, her hug warm and comforting. "I'm so sorry, Aurora," Isabella whispered. "He was a difficult man, but he loved you."
In his own way.
Isabella's words echoed Tommaso's earlier sentiment, a sentiment that felt hollow and meaningless in the face of the truth. She pulled away from Isabella, wiping her tears, forcing herself to regain control. "Isabella," she said, her voice hoarse.
"Did you know?"
"About Elena?" Isabella hesitated, her gaze shifting away from hers. I suspected," she said quietly. "But I didn't know for sure. Your father, he kept many secrets." "Tommaso knew," Aurora said, her voice filled with bitterness. He was the one who she couldn't finish the sentence, the words catching in her throat. Isabella looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Tommaso, he is loyal to your father," Isabella said. "He does what he is told."
"He always has."
"But he killed her," Aurora said, her voice rising in anger. "He killed my sister." Isabella didn't respond, her silence confirming Aurora's worst fears. She looked down at the floor, her shoulders shaking slightly. The weight of the situation, the weight of the truth, seemed to overwhelm her, leaving her speechless and heartbroken. The crackling of the dying embers in the fireplace was the only sound in the room, a somber counterpoint to the silent grief that filled the space. Aurora felt a new resolve hardening within her, a determination to uncover the full truth, to find justice for Elena, to break free from the chains of her family's legacy. But how could she, alone and vulnerable, possibly stand against the power and influence of the Derossi family, against the man who had been her father's most trusted enforcer? She glanced towards the door, half expecting Tommaso to appear at any moment, his presence a constant threat, a constant reminder of the danger she was in. And yet, she knew she couldn't run. Not this time. Chapter 8. Beneath the Mask of Civility. The days following Alessandro's death were a blur of activity, a whirlwind of preparations for the funeral, a somber procession of mourners, a constant stream of condolences, all veiled in the elaborate rituals and traditions of the Derossi family. Aurora moved through it all like a ghost, her emotions numb, her mind preoccupied with the secrets she now carried, with the dangerous game she was playing. The palazzo was filled with people, family members, business associates, friends, and enemies, all vying for position, all whispering behind their hands, all waiting to see what would happen next. The air was thick with tension, with unspoken rivalries, with the shifting power dynamics of a family suddenly without its patriarch. Tommaso was ever present, his watchful gaze following Aurora's every move, his presence a constant reminder of his betrayal, of his complicity in Elena's death. He maintained a facade of civility, of respectful mourning, but Aurora could see the calculation in his eyes, the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the veiled threats that lurked beneath his carefully constructed mask. He approached her often, offering his condolences, his support, his assistance, each gesture a calculated move, each word a carefully chosen probe. He was testing her, trying to gauge her reaction, to see if she suspected the truth, to determine if she was a threat. "Aurora," he said one evening, finding her alone on the terrace, overlooking the moonlit gardens. "How are you holding up?" It was a simple question, a polite inquiry, but Aurora could hear the underlying tension, the unspoken challenge. "As well as can be expected," she replied, her voice carefully neutral, betraying none of the turmoil within. She turned to face him, meeting his gaze, refusing to show any sign of weakness, any indication of fear. "Your father, he was a great man," Tommaso said, his voice laced with a hint of sadness, a hint of regret. "Yes," Aurora agreed, her voice flat and emotionless.
He was.
She couldn't bring herself to say more, to acknowledge the complicated, conflicted relationship she had with her father, the love and the fear, the respect and the resentment. "He left you a great responsibility," Tommaso continued, his gaze fixed on her face. "The future of the family, it's in your hands now." It was a subtle reminder of her position, of her power, of the expectations that now rested upon her shoulders. He was reminding her of the game, of the rules, of the consequences of disobedience. "I know," she said, her voice firm. She wouldn't be intimidated. She wouldn't be controlled. She would play the game, but she would play it on her own terms. "If you need anything," he said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "Anything at all, I'm here for you." It was a lie, a blatant lie, but he delivered it with such sincerity, such conviction, that it almost sounded believable. He was a master of deception, a skilled manipulator, a dangerous adversary. "Thank you, Tommaso," she said, forcing a smile. "I appreciate that." She turned away from him, gazing out at the moonlit gardens, the shadows stretching long and dark across the manicured lawns, the scent of jasmine and roses filling the air. The beauty of the surroundings was a stark contrast to the ugliness of the secrets that lurked beneath the surface, to the darkness that surrounded her. He moved closer, standing beside her, his presence a palpable force. She could feel his warmth, his strength, his underlying tension. "He trusted me, you know," Tommaso said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "Your father. He trusted me with everything." It was a veiled threat, a reminder of his power, of his influence, of his knowledge of the family secrets. He was warning her, subtly but unmistakably, not to cross him. "I know," Aurora said, her voice barely audible. She had to be careful, to tread lightly, to avoid arousing his suspicion. She was playing a dangerous game, a game of cat and mouse, a game where one wrong move could have deadly consequences. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, the tension palpable. The air crackled with unspoken words, with hidden desires, with the dangerous dance they were engaged in. He reached out, his hand gently touching her hair, his fingers brushing against her skin. The touch, unexpectedly tender, sent a shiver down her spine, a confusing mix of fear and something else, something she couldn't quite define. The unwanted, disturbing flicker of attraction again. She flinched, pulling away from his touch, her heart pounding in her chest. "Don't," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on her face, his eyes filled with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. It was a look that both intrigued and terrified her, a look that spoke of a hidden passion, a forbidden desire, a dangerous obsession. "You're afraid of me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. It was a statement, not a question, an acknowledgement of the fear that he saw in her eyes, the fear that he relished, the fear that he used to control her. Shouldn't I be? She countered, her voice regaining its strength. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a chill down her spine.
Perhaps, he said.
But fear can be exciting, don't you think? His words hung in the air, heavy and suggestive, a challenge, an invitation, a threat. He was playing with her, toying with her, enjoying her fear, her vulnerability. She turned away from him, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon, her mind racing, trying to find a way out of this dangerous game, a way to escape the web of deception that surrounded her. She was trapped, caught between her desire for justice, her fear of Tommaso, and the lingering, unsettling attraction she felt towards the man who had betrayed her, the man who held her fate in his hands. She knew she had to find a way to break free, to expose the truth, to reclaim her life.
But how?
The moon seemed to watch her, a silent witness to her struggle, to her silent vow to fight back, to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the garden, a whisper of hope, a promise of a new dawn, a dawn where she would no longer be a pawn in someone else's game. But tonight, the mask of civility had to remain in place, at least for a little while longer. Chapter 9. A storm breaks over the Arno. The funeral was a grand, elaborate affair, a spectacle of mourning and tradition. The entire de Rossi clan had gathered, along with a vast network of associates, allies, and rivals, all dressed in black, their faces somber, their eyes watchful. The air was thick with the scent of incense and lilies, the sound of hushed whispers and murmured prayers filling the ancient cathedral. Aurora stood at the front, beside Tommaso, her face veiled, her emotions hidden. She felt like an imposter, a puppet playing a role, a stranger in her own family. She went through the motions, reciting the prayers, accepting the condolences, maintaining the facade of grief and respect. But her mind was elsewhere, focused on the secrets she carried, on the plans she was slowly forming, on the dangerous path she was about to embark on. She had spent the past few days meticulously studying the documents she had found in the North Tower room, piecing together the puzzle of Elena's life, of her death, of the web of deceit that had surrounded her family for years. The documents revealed a complex network of financial transactions, secret alliances, and hidden betrayals. They implicated not only her father and Tommaso, but also other prominent members of the Florentine elite, powerful figures who had a vested interest in keeping the truth hidden. She had discovered that Elena's father was not just a casual acquaintance, but a rival businessman, a man who had threatened her father's empire. Elena's birth had been a scandal, a threat to the de Rossi legacy, a secret that had to be eliminated. Tommaso's role in Elena's death was even more chilling than she had imagined. He had not only carried out her father's orders, but he had also manipulated the investigation, ensuring that the truth remained buried, that Elena's death was ruled an accident. Aurora knew that she couldn't confront Tommaso directly. He was too powerful, too dangerous, too well-connected. She needed to find a way to expose him, to bring him to justice, without revealing her own knowledge, without putting herself in further danger. She had decided to seek help, to reach out to someone she thought she could trust, someone outside the de Rossi circle of influence. She had contacted an old friend, a journalist named Marco Bellini, a man known for his integrity, his courage, his relentless pursuit of truth. She had arranged to meet Marco secretly, away from the prying eyes of the palazzo, away from the watchful gaze of Tommaso. She had chosen a small, unassuming cafe near the Ponte Vecchio, a place where they could blend in with the crowds, where they could talk without being overheard. As the funeral procession made its way through the streets of Florence, a storm began to brew, the sky darkening, the wind picking up, the first drops of rain beginning to fall. The weather seemed to mirror the turmoil within Aurora, the sense of foreboding, the gathering storm that was about to break. After the burial, Aurora managed to slip away unnoticed, making her way to the cafe, her heart pounding in her chest. She arrived early, choosing a table in a secluded corner, her eyes scanning the room, watching for any sign of danger, any indication that she was being followed. The cafe was crowded, filled with tourists and locals, the air buzzing with conversation, the the aroma of coffee and pastries filling the air. She ordered a cappuccino, trying to appear calm, composed, like any other patron enjoying a quiet afternoon. Marco arrived a few minutes later, his face etched with concern. He was a tall, thin man, with a kind face and intelligent eyes. He had been a friend of her family, a confidant of her mother, a man she had always trusted. "Aurora," he said, his voice low and discreet. "Thank you for coming." He sat down opposite her, his gaze searching hers, trying to gauge her emotional state. "I need your help, Marco," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, sealed envelope containing copies of the most incriminating documents, the evidence that would expose Tommaso, that would reveal the truth about Elena's death. She handed the envelope to Marco, her hand shaking. This is everything," she said. It's dangerous. But it's the truth." Marco took the envelope, his expression grave. He opened it, quickly scanning the documents, his eyes widening in disbelief. "This is explosive, Aurora," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This could bring down a lot of people." "I know," she said. "But it needs to be done. Elena, she deserves justice. And I need to stop Tommaso. Before he does something else." The rain began to fall harder, drumming against the windows of the cafe, the wind howling outside, the storm mirroring the tempest raging within her. Marco looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and admiration. "This is a dangerous game you're playing, Aurora," he said. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I have to," she said, her voice firm. "I have no choice." He nodded, his expression resolute. "I'll help you," he said. "I'll get this to the right people. We'll expose the truth. Together." As they spoke, a figure emerged from the shadows outside the cafe, his face hidden by the rain, his eyes fixed on Aurora. It was Tommaso. He had followed her. He had seen the exchange. He knew. The storm had broken, and Aurora was caught in its eye, the danger swirling around her, the future uncertain, the stakes higher than ever before. He slowly put his hand inside his jacket, the outline of something hard and metallic visible beneath the fabric. The promise of violence hung heavy in the rain-soaked air. Chapter 10. The Price of Loyalty, the Cost of Love. Tommaso entered the cafe, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes fixed on Aurora. The rain dripped from his coat, forming small puddles on the floor around him. He approached their table, his presence casting a shadow over them, silencing their conversation. Marco stood up, instinctively placing himself between Aurora and Tommaso, a protective gesture that was both brave and futile. "Tommaso," Marco said, his voice calm but firm. "What a surprise." Tommaso ignored Marco, his gaze locked on Aurora. "Aurora," he said, his voice low and smooth, the same voice that had both soothed and terrified her. "We need to talk." It wasn't a request, but a command, an order that brooked no argument. Aurora felt a chill run down her spine, a sense of dread coiling in her stomach. She knew this confrontation was inevitable, but she hadn't expected it to happen so soon, so publicly. "I have nothing to say to you, Tommaso," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the fear she felt. She stood up, meeting his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. She had made her choice, she had chosen her path, and she wouldn't back down, not now, not ever. Tommaso's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of anger crossing his face. "Don't play games with me, Aurora," he said, his voice laced with a hint of menace. "I know what you've been up to. I know who you've been talking to." He gestured towards Marco, his eyes filled with contempt. "This journalist. You think he can protect you? You think he can expose the truth? You're naive, Aurora. You don't understand the power you're dealing with." Marco stepped forward, his voice rising slightly. "Leave her alone, Tommaso," he said. "This has nothing to do with you." Tommaso turned to Marco, his expression cold and menacing. "This has everything to do with me," he said. "This is family business. And you're interfering." He reached inside his jacket, his hand closing around the object hidden beneath the fabric. Aurora knew what it was. She had seen the outline, the glint of metal. It was a gun. "Tommaso, don't," she said, her voice pleading. "Please, don't do this." He ignored her, his focus entirely on Marco. "You should have stayed out of it," he said, his voice low and deadly. Before anyone could react, he pulled out the gun, pointing it directly at Marco. The cafe erupted in chaos, screams filling the air, people scrambling for cover, the sound of shattering glass adding to the pandemonium. Aurora reacted instinctively, without thinking. She lunged forward, pushing Tommaso's arm, deflecting the shot. The bullet went wild, shattering a mirror on the wall, sending shards of glass flying through the air. Tommaso stumbled back, surprised by Aurora's sudden intervention. He regained his balance, his eyes blazing with anger, his face contorted with rage. "You," he snarled, his voice filled with fury. "You dare to defy me?" He raised the gun again, this time pointing it at Aurora. She stood her ground, her eyes locked on his, her body trembling but resolute. "I'm not afraid of you, Tommaso," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "I know what you did. I know about Elena, and I won't let you get away with it." His finger tightened on the trigger, his face a mask of hatred and betrayal. He was about to shoot, to silence her forever, to protect his secrets, to maintain his power. But before he fired again, something unexpected happened. A loud shout echoed through the small space. "Tommaso, enough!" The word was loaded with authority. Everyone froze. Slowly, Tommaso lowered the gun, his eyes shifting towards the source of the voice. A figure, dressed in simple clothing, had swiftly entered the space. He had a kind, lined face, which was now creased with deep concern. It was Isabella. "Isabella?" Aurora asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and concern. "I followed you," Isabella said, her voice shaky but certain. I had a bad feeling." She advanced, closing the small gap that remained. "Tommaso," Isabella said, her voice hardening, "put the gun down."
"Now."
He stared at her. Then something shifted. A small part of him, deep inside, seemed to respond. He lowered the weapon. "This isn't over, Aurora," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You've made a powerful enemy, and you will pay the price." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the storm, leaving behind a scene of chaos and fear, a shattered cafe, a broken trust, a love betrayed. Aurora stood there, trembling, her body shaking with adrenaline, her mind reeling from the events that had just transpired. She had faced Tommaso, she had defied him, she had survived. But the cost had been high, the price of loyalty, the cost of love, a burden she would have to carry for the rest of her life. She had chosen her side, she had chosen justice, but she knew that the battle was far from over. Isabella wrapped her arms around Aurora, a gesture of protection that was also one of deep, profound worry. "Are you okay, my dear?" Isabella whispered. Aurora nodded, unable to form a coherent response. She knew that she would never be truly okay again, not after what had just happened. But she had taken the first step, a dangerous step, towards reclaiming her life, towards exposing the truth, towards finding justice for Elena. The storm outside continued to rage, but within Aurora, a new strength was beginning to emerge, a strength born of courage, of determination, of a love that refused to be silenced. She looked at Marco, who was shaken but unharmed, his eyes filled with gratitude and concern. The road ahead was long and perilous, but she was no longer alone. She had allies, she had hope, and she had the truth on her side. The cost was high, but the fight had only just begun. Chapter 11. Scars that never fade, words that still sting. The aftermath of the confrontation at the cafe left Aurora shaken, but resolute. The image of Tommaso's rage, the feel of the gun pointed at her, the sound of the gunshot, all replayed in her mind, a constant reminder of the danger she was in. But the encounter had also solidified her determination, strengthening her resolve to expose the truth, to bring justice to Elena, to break free from the suffocating grip of her family's legacy. Isabella had taken Aurora back to her small apartment in Florence, a safe haven away from the prying eyes of the palazzo, away from the constant scrutiny of Tommaso. The apartment, though modest, felt like a sanctuary, a place where Aurora could finally breathe, where she could gather her thoughts, where she could plan her next move. Marco, though shaken by the encounter, had remained steadfast in his support, promising to help Aurora navigate the dangerous waters ahead, to connect her with the right people, to ensure that the truth was revealed. The following days were spent in a whirlwind of activity, a clandestine dance of secret meetings, coded messages, and carefully planned strategies. Aurora worked closely with Marco, sharing everything she had learned, providing him with the documents, the evidence he needed to build a case, to expose the crimes of the Derossi family. She also spent time with Isabella, learning more about her family's history, about her mother's affair, about Elena's life, about the secrets that had been so carefully guarded for so long. Isabella had been a silent witness to much of it, bound by loyalty, by fear, by a sense of obligation to protect the family, even from itself. "I always knew there was something wrong," Isabella confessed one evening, her voice filled with regret. "But I didn't want to believe it. Your father, he was a powerful man. And Tommaso, he was like a son to him." Aurora listened patiently, understanding Isabella's conflicted emotions, her years of silence, her complicity in the web of deceit. She didn't blame Isabella. She knew that she had been a victim of the same system, the same patriarchal power structure that had silenced Elena, that had tried to silence her. "It's not your fault, Isabella," Aurora said, her voice gentle. "You did what you thought was right. You protected me, in your own way." Isabella nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I should have done more," she said. "I should have spoken up. I should have protected Elena." Aurora reached out and took Isabella's hand, her touch offering comfort, understanding, forgiveness. "It's not too late," she said. "We can still do something. We can still bring justice to Elena. We can still break the cycle." Isabella squeezed Aurora's hand, her grip firm, her eyes filled with a newfound determination. "I'll help you," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes." As Aurora delved deeper into the past, she began to uncover more secrets, more layers of deceit, more evidence of the crimes that had been committed in the name of family honor, in the name of power, in the name of silence. She discovered that Tommaso had not only carried out her father's orders, but he had also profited from Elena's death, using his knowledge of the family's secrets to blackmail other members of the Florentine elite, to amass his own wealth and power. She also learned that Tommaso had been obsessed with her, with Aurora, for years, his desire fueled by a twisted sense of entitlement, by a belief that she was his by right, a prize to be won, a possession to be controlled. The more she learned, the more disgusted she became, the more determined she was to expose him, to bring him to justice, to destroy the empire of lies he had built. But she still had those strangely contradictory feelings when she thought about him. She couldn't explain them. They were unwelcome. She decided that she needed to focus. One evening, as Aurora was reviewing the documents, she came across a small, faded photograph tucked away in a hidden compartment of Elena's journal. It was a picture of Elena and Tommaso, taken years before, when they were both teenagers. They were standing close together, their arms around each other, their faces smiling, their eyes filled with a youthful innocence, a carefree joy. Tommaso looked different, younger, softer, his face devoid of the hardness, the cynicism, the cruelty she had come to associate with him. It was a glimpse of a different Tommaso, a Tommaso before the darkness, before the betrayal, before the murder. It was a reminder that even monsters were once human, that even the most hardened hearts had once known love, had once known innocence. He and Elena had clearly cared for each other. The thought was a cruel twist. The photograph sparked a flicker of something within Aurora, a pang of something she couldn't quite define. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't understanding, it wasn't even pity. It was a recognition of the shared humanity, of the lost innocence, of the scars that never fade, of the words that still sting. She closed her eyes, her mind filled with images of Elena, of Tommaso, of her father, of herself. She saw the tangled web of relationships, the love and the betrayal, the loyalty and the deceit, the power and the vulnerability. She realized that she was not just fighting for justice. She was fighting for her own soul, for her own freedom, for her own right to choose her own path, to break free from the chains of the past, to create a future where silence no longer reigned, where truth prevailed, where love was not a weapon, but a source of strength. The scars of the past would never fully heal. The words of betrayal would always sting, but Aurora knew that she could no longer be defined by them. She would carry them with her, as a reminder of what she had overcome, as a testament to her resilience, as a source of her newfound strength. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the photograph, her heart filled with a quiet determination, a fierce resolve. She would not be silenced. She would not be defeated. She would fight. For Elena. For herself. For the future. The city outside, bathed in the soft glow of twilight, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next move, for the next chapter in this unfolding drama of love, betrayal, and redemption. Chapter 12. A flicker of hope in the darkness. Marco's investigation was progressing rapidly. He had managed to gather enough evidence to pique the interest of a prominent anti-mafia prosecutor, a woman named Giuliana Rossi, known for her incorruptibility and her relentless pursuit of justice. Giuliana had reviewed the documents Aurora had provided, and she was convinced that there was a strong case to be made, not only against Tommaso, but also against other members of the de Rossi family and their associates. Giuliana was a formidable woman, in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had dedicated her life to fighting organized crime, and she had a reputation for being fearless, unwavering, and utterly committed to her work. Aurora met with Giuliana several times, providing her with additional information, answering her questions, sharing her insights into the inner workings of the de Rossi family. Giuliana was impressed by Aurora's courage, her determination, her willingness to risk everything to expose the truth. "You're a brave woman, Aurora," Giuliana said one evening as they sat in her office, reviewing the evidence. "You're putting yourself in a very dangerous position, but you're doing the right thing." Aurora nodded, her expression resolute. "I have to," she said. "I can't live with the lies anymore. I can't let them get away with it." Giuliana smiled, a rare expression of warmth that softened her usually stern features.
"We won't let them," she said.
"We'll get them. Together." Giuliana explained that she was building a case, gathering additional evidence, preparing to make arrests. She warned Aurora that it would be a long and difficult process, that there would be challenges, setbacks, and dangers along the way. "They're powerful, Aurora," Giuliana said. "They have connections, influence, money. They'll fight back. They'll try to discredit you, to intimidate you, to silence you." Aurora knew that Giuliana was right, but she wasn't afraid. She had come too far. She had risked too much to back down now. She was prepared to face whatever came her way, to fight for justice, to expose the truth, no matter the cost. "I'm ready," Aurora said, her voice firm. "I'm not afraid of them anymore." Giuliana nodded, her eyes filled with respect.
"Good," she said.
"Because we're going to need all the courage we can muster." As the investigation progressed, Aurora felt a flicker of hope in the darkness, a sense of optimism that had been absent from her life for so long. She was no longer alone. She had allies. She had support. She had a chance to finally break free from the suffocating grip of her family's legacy. She continued to work closely with Marco and Giuliana, providing them with information, assisting them in their investigation, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Tommaso and the rest of the de Rossi clan. She also stayed in close contact with Isabella, who had become a valuable source of information, providing her with insights into the inner workings of the palazzo, the movements of Tommaso, the whispers and rumors that circulated among the staff. Isabella had become a trusted confidant, a friend, an ally in Aurora's fight for justice. She had risked her own safety, her own livelihood, to help Aurora, to atone for her past silence, to make amends for her complicity in the family's crimes. "I owe you so much, Isabella," Aurora said one evening, as they sat together in her apartment, sharing a quiet meal. Isabella smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "No, Aurora," she said. "I owe you. You've given me a chance to redeem myself, to finally do what's right." Aurora reached out and took Isabella's hand, her touch expressing gratitude, affection, solidarity. "We're in this together," she said. "We'll get through this. Together." As the days turned into weeks, the tension mounted, the anticipation building, the sense of impending confrontation growing stronger. Aurora knew that the storm was about to break, that the truth was about to be revealed, that the battle for justice was about to begin. She prepared herself mentally, emotionally, physically. She knew that she would have to face Tommaso, to confront him, to testify against him, to expose his crimes to the world. She knew that it would be dangerous, that it would be difficult, that it would be painful. But she was ready. She had found a new strength within herself, a strength born of courage, of determination, of a love that had been tested, betrayed, but not broken. A flicker of hope, a spark of optimism, had ignited within her, illuminating the darkness, guiding her path, giving her the strength to face the challenges ahead. The city outside, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the dawn, for the moment when justice would finally prevail. The weight of her decision, to fight, felt lighter now. She had begun to heal, and with that came a fresh resolve. She knew that there would be setbacks, perhaps, but for the first time, she felt a sense of control. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and ultimately, it set her free. Even if it was just for this one night. Even if it was a brief moment in the calm before the inevitable storm. It would be enough. Chapter 13. The Serpent in the Garden of Eden. The summons arrived unexpectedly, a formal invitation delivered by a uniformed messenger, bearing the unmistakable crest of the Derossi family, the coiled serpent, a symbol that had once represented power and prestige, but now felt like a brand, a mark of shame. Aurora had been expecting a warrant, an arrest, a confrontation, but this was different. It was an invitation to a private meeting, a request for her presence at the palazzo, a summons from Tommaso Benedetti. She knew it was a trap, a ploy, a dangerous game, but she also knew that she couldn't refuse. She had to face him, to confront him, to show him that she was not afraid, that she would not be silenced. She discussed the invitation with Marco and Juliana, seeking their advice, weighing her options. They were both concerned, warning her of the dangers, urging her to be cautious. "It's a trap, Aurora," Marco said, his voice filled with worry. "He's trying to lure you back, to control you, to silence you." Juliana agreed, her expression grave. "We don't have enough evidence to arrest him yet," she said. "He's still protected, still powerful. He could do anything." But Aurora was determined. She had come too far, she had risked too much, to back down now. She had to face him, to show him that she was not the naive, obedient daughter he remembered, that she was a force to be reckoned with. "I have to go," she said, her voice firm. "I have to face him. I have to show him that I'm not afraid." Marco and Juliana exchanged worried glances, but they knew that they couldn't stop her. They respected her courage, her determination, her unwavering commitment to justice. "Be careful, Aurora," Juliana said. "We'll be watching. We'll be ready to intervene if necessary." Marco nodded, his eyes filled with concern. "Don't take any unnecessary risks," he said. "Your safety is our priority." Aurora thanked them, her heart filled with gratitude for their support, for their friendship, for their unwavering belief in her. She prepared herself mentally, emotionally, physically. She knew that she was walking into a lion's den, that she was facing a dangerous predator, that she was risking everything. But she was ready. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant black dress, a symbol of mourning, a reminder of the loss she had suffered, of the betrayal she had endured. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, no adornment, presenting herself as she truly was, stripped bare of all pretense, all artifice. She arrived at the palazzo at the appointed time, the gates swinging open silently, the guards watching her with wary eyes. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, with unspoken threats, with the looming presence of Tommaso Benedetti. She was escorted to the familiar study, the room where her father had died, the room where she had discovered the truth about Elena, the room where her life had changed forever. Tommaso was waiting for her, standing by the window, his back to the door, his silhouette framed against the darkening sky. He turned as she entered, his eyes meeting hers, his expression unreadable. "Aurora," he said, his voice low and smooth, the same voice that had haunted her dreams, that had filled her with both fear and a strange, unsettling desire. "You came." It wasn't a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement of her presence, of her defiance, of her courage. "You summoned me," she replied, her voice calm and measured, betraying none of the turmoil within. She stood her ground, meeting his gaze, refusing to be intimidated, refusing to show any sign of weakness. He approached her, his movements slow and deliberate, his presence filling the room, his scent, that familiar blend of expensive cologne and something darker, something indefinable, filling her senses. "I wanted to talk," he said, his voice laced with a hint of something. Was it regret? Apology? It was hard to tell. "About what?" she asked, her voice firm. "About Elena? About the lies? About the murder?" His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of anger crossing his face. "Don't be foolish, Aurora," he said. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know everything, Tommaso," she said, her voice unwavering. "I know about the letters, the documents, the secret meetings. I know about your involvement, your betrayal, your crimes." He laughed, a cold, cynical laugh that sent a shiver down her spine. "You have no proof," he said. "It's your word against mine. And who do you think they'll believe? The grieving daughter? Or the loyal servant?" "They'll believe the truth," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "And the truth will come out, Tommaso. One way or another." He stepped closer, his face inches from hers, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and something else, something darker, something she couldn't quite define. The familiar, unwanted flicker of attraction sparked within her, but this time it was overshadowed by a profound sense of disgust. "You're playing a dangerous game, Aurora," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "A game you can't win." "I'm not playing a game, Tommaso," she said. "I'm seeking justice. For Elena. For myself. For everyone you've hurt." He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. The touch, once a source of confusion, of a strange, unsettling desire, now felt repulsive, a violation, a threat. She flinched, pulling away from his touch, her eyes filled with disgust. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice trembling with anger. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that revealed the serpent beneath the surface, the darkness that lurked within him. "You can't deny it, can you, Aurora?" he said. "The attraction, the desire, it's still there, between us." "There's nothing between us, Tommaso," she said, her voice firm, "except for hate, and betrayal, and a thirst for justice." He laughed again, a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed in the silence of the room. "You're a fool, Aurora," he said. "A naive, idealistic fool. You think you can change things? You think you can defeat me? You're wrong. We'll see," she said, her voice unwavering. "We'll see who's the fool, Tommaso, when the truth comes out." He stepped back, his expression hardening, his eyes filled with a cold, calculating rage. "The truth," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "The truth is a dangerous thing, Aurora, and it can destroy you." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the room, leaving Aurora standing alone, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. The serpent had revealed itself, the battle lines had been drawn, the game was on. And Aurora knew that she had just made a powerful enemy, an enemy who would stop at nothing to protect his secrets, to maintain his power, to silence her forever. But she also knew that she was not alone, and that gave her strength. The room felt colder, the shadows deeper, as she prepared herself for the fight of her life, a fight for justice, for truth, for her own soul. She could almost hear the hissing of the serpent, a constant reminder of the danger she was in, of the enemy she faced. Chapter 14. Reckoning Under a Blood-Red Moon. The days following Aurora's confrontation with Tommaso were filled with a tense anticipation, a sense of impending doom, a feeling that the storm was about to break. She knew that Tommaso would not let her defiance go unpunished, that he would retaliate, that he would use all his power and influence to silence her, to destroy her. She stayed in close contact with Marco and Giuliana, updating them on her meeting with Tommaso, sharing her fears, seeking their advice. They were both increasingly concerned, warning her to be extra cautious, urging her to take precautions, to protect herself. "He's desperate, Aurora," Marco said, his voice filled with worry. "He knows that we're closing in, that we're about to expose him. He'll do anything to stop us." Giuliana agreed, her expression grave. "We're accelerating the investigation," she said. "We're preparing to make arrests, to issue warrants. But it's going to take time. And in the meantime, you're in danger." Aurora knew that they were right, but she refused to be intimidated. She refused to hide. She refused to let fear control her. She had come too far. She had risked too much to back down now. She continued to work with Marco and Giuliana, providing them with information, assisting them in their investigation, preparing for the inevitable showdown with Tommaso and the rest of the de Rossi clan. She also spent time with Isabella, seeking solace in her friendship, drawing strength from her unwavering support. Isabella had become a surrogate mother figure to her, a source of comfort, of wisdom, of unconditional love. "You're so brave, Aurora," Isabella said one evening, as they sat together in her apartment, sharing a quiet moment. "You're facing your fears. You're fighting for what's right. You're honoring Elena's memory." Aurora smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I'm just doing what I have to do," she said. "I'm following my conscience. I'm seeking justice. I'm trying to break free from the chains of the past." Isabella reached out and took Aurora's hand, her touch conveying warmth, affection, solidarity.
"You're not alone, Aurora," she said.
"I'm here for you.
We're all here for you."
As the days passed, the tension grew, the atmosphere becoming increasingly charged, the sense of impending doom intensifying. Aurora felt like she was living on a knife's edge, balanced between hope and despair, between courage and fear, between life and death. Then, one night, it happened. Aurora was awakened by a loud noise, a shattering of glass, a sound of breaking and entering. She jumped out of bed, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing, her body trembling with fear. She knew instantly that it was Tommaso, that he had come for her, that he was going to make good on his threats. She grabbed her phone, her hand shaking so violently she could barely dial. She called Marco, his voice answering on the first ring, his tone filled with alarm. "Aurora? What's wrong?" "He's here, Marco," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Tommaso. He's in the apartment." Marco's voice was urgent, filled with a sense of immediate danger.
"Get out, Aurora," he said. "Get out now. We're on our way."
Aurora hung up the phone, her mind racing, her body moving on instinct. She grabbed a small, antique letter opener from her desk, the only weapon she could find, her hand gripping it tightly, her knuckles white. She crept towards the door, her ears straining to hear any sound, any movement, any indication of Tommaso's presence. She could hear him moving around in the living room, his footsteps heavy, his breathing labored, his voice muttering curses under his breath. She reached the door, slowly turning the knob, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. She opened the door a crack, peering out into the hallway, her eyes scanning the shadows, searching for any sign of danger. She saw him. He was standing in the living room, his back to her, his silhouette illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the broken window. He was holding a gun, his hand steady, his aim focused on the empty space where she had been sleeping just moments before. He turned, his eyes searching the room, his face contorted with rage, his expression that of a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous. "Aurora," he snarled, his voice filled with venom. Come out, wherever you are." She knew that she had only seconds to react, to make a choice, to fight or to flee. She chose to fight. She burst out of the bedroom, charging towards Tommaso, her letter opener raised, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. He saw her, his eyes widening in surprise, his reaction momentarily delayed. She lunged at him, stabbing him in the arm, the blade of the letter opener piercing his flesh, drawing blood. He cried out in pain, dropping the gun, his hand clutching his wounded arm. He stumbled back, his face contorted with a mixture of pain and fury. "You bitch," he hissed, his voice filled with hatred. He lunged at her, grabbing her, his hands closing around her throat, his grip tightening, choking her, cutting off her air. She struggled, fighting against his strength, his rage, his determination to kill her. She kicked, she scratched, she bit, using every ounce of her strength to resist him. But he was too strong, too powerful, too consumed by his hatred. She felt her strength fading, her vision blurring, her consciousness slipping away. She was about to lose, about to die, about to become another victim of the Derossi family's darkness. Then, suddenly, she heard the sound of sirens, the flashing lights of police cars, the shouts of officers. Marco and Giuliana had arrived. Tommaso heard it too, his eyes widening in panic, his grip loosening slightly. He knew that he was caught, that he had failed, that his reign of terror was over. He released Aurora, shoving her away, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and defeat. He turned to flee, but it was too late. The police burst into the apartment, their guns drawn, their voices commanding him to surrender. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape, a way out. But there was no escape. He was surrounded, cornered, defeated. He slowly raised his hands, his face a mask of resignation, his body slumping in defeat. He was arrested, handcuffed, taken away, his reign of terror finally over. Aurora collapsed onto the floor, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her throat bruised and sore. Marco rushed to her side, his face filled with relief and concern. "Aurora, are you all right?" he asked, his voice trembling. She nodded, unable to speak, tears streaming down her face. She was alive. She had survived. She had faced her demons. She had fought back. Giuliana approached her, her expression a mixture of relief and satisfaction. "It's over, Aurora," she said.
He's gone.
"You're safe now." Aurora looked up at them, her eyes filled with gratitude, with relief, with a newfound sense of peace. She had done it. She had exposed the truth. She had brought justice to Elena. She had broken free from the chains of the past. The moon, a blood-red orb hanging low in the sky, seemed to cast a benediction over the scene, a silent witness to the reckoning that had just taken place, a promise of a new dawn, a new beginning, a new life. The scars of the past would always remain, but Aurora knew that she was no longer defined by them. She was a survivor, a warrior, a woman who had found her voice, her strength, her freedom. The serpent had been vanquished, the garden had been cleansed, and Aurora could finally begin to heal. Chapter 15. Crossroads of Fate and Forgiveness. The arrest of Tommaso Benedetti sent shockwaves through Florence, reverberating through the intricate network of power and influence that the Derossi family had cultivated for generations. The news dominated headlines, whispered conversations, and hushed gatherings, the once untouchable family now exposed, vulnerable, and facing the consequences of their long-hidden crimes. Aurora, though still recovering from the physical and emotional trauma of Tommaso's attack, found herself thrust into the center of the unfolding drama. She became a symbol of courage, of resilience, of the power of truth, her story inspiring others to speak out, to challenge the established order, to demand justice. Giuliana Rossi, the tenacious prosecutor, wasted no time in building her case, meticulously gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and preparing for trial. She was determined to bring not only Tommaso, but also all those who had been complicit in Elena's murder and the subsequent cover-up, to justice. Marco Bellini, the journalist who had been Aurora's steadfast ally, continued to report on the unfolding events, his articles exposing the intricate web of corruption, deceit, and violence that had permeated the de Rossi family and their associates. Isabella, who had witnessed firsthand the darkness within the palazzo, provided crucial testimony, her words confirming Aurora's account, adding weight to the prosecution's case, and helping to dismantle the wall of silence that had protected the family for so long. As the investigation progressed, more secrets were revealed, more lies were exposed, more individuals were implicated. The de Rossi empire, once seemingly invincible, began to crumble, its foundations weakened by the relentless pursuit of justice. Aurora, despite the constant media attention, the threats, and the lingering fear, found a newfound sense of peace, a feeling of liberation that she had never experienced before. She had faced her demons, she had confronted her past, she had spoken her truth, and she had survived. She spent her days working with Giuliana and Marco, assisting them in their efforts, providing them with information, offering her insights, and preparing for her testimony at trial. She also began to rebuild her life, to reconnect with the world she had left behind, to rediscover the simple joys, the quiet moments, the beauty that she had almost forgotten. She returned to her work as a book restorer, finding solace in the delicate task of preserving the past, of bringing old, forgotten stories back to life. She found comfort in the scent of aged paper and leather, in the quiet solitude of her workshop, in the slow, methodical process of restoration. She also began to explore her own past, to delve deeper into her family's history, to understand the forces that had shaped her life, that had led her to this crossroads of fate and forgiveness. She visited the North Tower room again, this time not as a prisoner of the past, but as a liberator, a seeker of truth, a woman determined to understand, to forgive, to heal. She reread Elena's journal, her heart aching with grief for the sister she had never known, for the life that had been stolen, for the love that had been denied. She found a measure of peace in Elena's words, in her spirit, in her unwavering hope, even in the face of adversity. She also began to understand her father's actions, not to condone them, not to excuse them, but to see them in the context of his own upbringing, his own fears, his own distorted sense of loyalty and obligation. She realized that he had been a prisoner of his own past, trapped by the traditions, the expectations, the secrets of his family, unable to break free from the cycle of violence and deceit. She began to feel a sense of compassion for him, a forgiveness that was not about forgetting or condoning, but about understanding, about letting go of the anger and the resentment, about finding peace within herself. She also started to reevaluate her feelings towards Tommaso. She knew that he was a dangerous man, a criminal, a murderer, but she also remembered the photograph, the glimpse of a different Tommaso, a younger, softer, more vulnerable Tommaso, before the darkness had consumed him. She recognized that he had been a victim of the same system, the same toxic culture that had shaped her own life, that had led him down a path of violence and betrayal. She couldn't forgive him for his crimes, but she could understand the forces that had driven him, the choices that had led him to this point. As the trial approached, Aurora found herself at a crossroads, a pivotal moment in her life. She had to decide what she wanted, what she needed, what she was willing to fight for. She had to choose between the past and the future, between vengeance and forgiveness, between hatred and love. She had to choose her own path, to define her own destiny, to create her own legacy. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be challenges, setbacks, and pain. But she was no longer afraid. She had found her voice, her strength, her purpose. She was ready to face whatever came her way, to fight for justice, to embrace truth, to live a life of her own choosing. The city of Florence, bathed in the golden light of a new dawn, seemed to be awakening alongside her, shedding its shadows, embracing a future filled with hope, with possibility, with the promise of redemption. The trial was about to begin. Chapter 16. Whispers of Rebellion in the Night. The atmosphere in Florence was electric, charged with anticipation and tension. The trial of Tommaso Benedetti and his co-conspirators was about to begin, and the city held its breath, waiting for the culmination of the drama that had gripped its attention for months. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with journalists, spectators, family members, and associates of both the de Rossi and Benedetti clans. The air was thick with the scent of perfume, sweat, and nervous energy, the murmur of hushed conversations creating a constant hum of anticipation. Aurora sat in the front row, beside Marco and Isabella, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was dressed in a simple black suit, her hair pulled back, her face pale but resolute. She was ready to face her past, to speak her truth, to testify against the man who had haunted her dreams, who had betrayed her trust, who had murdered her sister. Giuliana Rossi, the prosecutor, stood before the judge, her demeanor confident and commanding. She outlined the charges against Tommaso and his co-defendants, detailing the evidence, presenting the witnesses, and building a compelling case for their guilt. The defense attorneys, a team of highly paid, well-connected lawyers, attempted to discredit the prosecution's witnesses, to sow doubt in the minds of the jury, to portray Tommaso as a victim of circumstance, a loyal servant who had been wrongly accused. But Giuliana was relentless, her questioning sharp and incisive, her arguments persuasive and compelling. She presented the documents Aurora had found in the North Tower room, the letters, the financial records, the photographs, each piece of evidence adding to the mounting case against Tommaso and his accomplices. Isabella testified first, her voice trembling slightly, but her words clear and unwavering. She described the atmosphere of fear and secrecy that had permeated the palazzo, the whispers and rumors that had circulated about Elena's disappearance, the unspoken truths that everyone had known but no one had dared to speak. Marco testified next, his voice calm and authoritative. He described his investigation, his interviews with Aurora, his discovery of the evidence that had implicated Tommaso and his co-conspirators. Then, it was Aurora's turn. She walked to the witness stand, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her, her heart pounding in her chest. She took the oath, her voice clear and strong, her eyes fixed on the judge. Giuliana began her questioning, gently guiding Aurora through her story, leading her through the events that had led to this moment, to this confrontation with her past. Aurora spoke of her childhood, of her friendship with Elena, of her father's controlling nature, of Tommaso's ever-present presence, of the secrets that had haunted her family for years. She described the discovery of the letter, her flight from Florence, her return, her confrontation with her dying father, her discovery of Elena's journal, and the incriminating evidence in the North Tower room. She spoke of Tommaso's threats, his attempts to silence her, his attack on her in her apartment, his ultimate arrest. Her voice trembled at times, tears welling up in her eyes, but she continued, her words unwavering, her truth undeniable. She spoke with courage, with conviction, with a fierce determination to expose the darkness that had consumed her family, to bring justice to Elena, to reclaim her own life. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on Aurora, every ear listening intently to her testimony. The air was thick with emotion, with tension, with the weight of unspoken truths finally being revealed. Then, it was the defense attorney's turn to cross-examine Aurora. He was a skilled and experienced lawyer, known for his aggressive tactics, his ability to twist words, to sow doubt, to discredit witnesses. He attacked Aurora's credibility, questioning her motives, suggesting that she was seeking revenge, that she was fabricating evidence, that she was mentally unstable. He tried to paint her as a spoiled, privileged daughter, a woman who had betrayed her family, who was seeking attention, who was motivated by greed and ambition. But Aurora stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated, refusing to be silenced. She answered his questions calmly and directly, her voice firm, her eyes unwavering. She refuted his accusations, she challenged his assumptions, she defended her truth. The cross-examination was brutal. A relentless assault on Aurora's character, her integrity, her sanity. But she endured. She persevered. She refused to break. Finally, after hours of grueling questioning, the defense attorney finished his cross-examination. Aurora stepped down from the witness stand, her body exhausted, her mind drained, but her spirit unbroken. She had faced her demons, she had spoken her truth, she had survived. As she returned to her seat, she saw Tommaso staring at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and something else. Was it respect? Admiration? Regret? She couldn't tell. But she knew that she had made a difference, that she had exposed him, that she had taken away his power, that she had broken his hold over her. The trial continued for several weeks, with more witnesses, more evidence, more arguments. The prosecution presented a compelling case, meticulously building a narrative of deceit, betrayal, and murder. The defense fought back, attempting to create doubt, to discredit the witnesses, to protect their clients. But in the end, the truth prevailed. The jury returned with a verdict: guilty. Tommaso Benedetti was found guilty of murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. His co-conspirators were also found guilty on various charges. A collective gasp went through the courtroom, followed by a stunned silence. Then, a murmur of relief, of satisfaction, of justice finally being served. Aurora felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mixture of relief, of sadness, of vindication, of closure. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. She looked at Tommaso, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with despair. He had been defeated, his power broken, his secrets exposed. He was led away in handcuffs, his reign of terror finally at an end. Aurora, Marco, and Isabella left the courtroom together. Stepping out into the bright sunlight, the city of Florence spread out before them, bathed in the golden glow of a new dawn. Whispers of rebellion had rippled through the night, challenging the established order, demanding change, seeking justice. And those whispers had grown into a roar, a powerful force that had shattered the silence, that had exposed the truth, that had brought down a criminal empire. Aurora had been at the heart of that rebellion, her courage, her determination, her unwavering commitment to truth, inspiring others to join her, to fight for a better future. The city seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, the weight of the past lifting, the promise of a new beginning filling the air. She still had a long journey to recovery, but she knew this was just the start. Chapter 17. The Unraveling Threads of Deceit. The aftermath of the trial brought a sense of closure, but also a period of intense scrutiny and upheaval. The de Rossi name, once synonymous with power and prestige, was now tarnished, associated with scandal, crime, and betrayal. The family's assets were frozen, their businesses scrutinized, their connections severed. The empire that Alessandro de Rossi had built with such ruthless ambition was crumbling, its foundations shattered by the truth that Aurora had unearthed. Aurora found herself navigating a complex landscape of legal proceedings, media inquiries, and family conflicts. She was hailed as a heroine by some, vilified as a traitor by others. She received both death threats and messages of support, her life a constant reminder of the divisive nature of her actions, of the profound impact she had had on the city of Florence. She relied heavily on Marco and Giuliana for support, their guidance and friendship proving invaluable as she navigated the treacherous waters of her newfound notoriety. They helped her deal with the legal challenges, the media scrutiny, and the emotional toll of the trial and its aftermath. Isabella remained her steadfast companion, her presence a constant source of comfort and strength. They had moved into a small, secure apartment together, creating a safe haven away from the prying eyes of the public, a place where they could heal, rebuild, and plan for the future. Aurora spent her days working with Giuliana's team, assisting in the ongoing investigations, providing information, and helping to untangle the complex web of financial transactions, secret agreements, and hidden assets that the de Rossi family had accumulated over the years. She also began the process of liquidating the family's assets, using the proceeds to establish a foundation in Elena's name, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting victims of violence and abuse, to providing education and opportunities for underprivileged children, to promoting justice and equality in Florence. It was a way for Aurora to honor Elena's memory, to give back to the community, to turn the legacy of darkness and deceit into a force for good, for healing, for hope. As she delved deeper into the family's affairs, Aurora discovered more layers of deception, more hidden secrets, more evidence of the lengths to which her father and Tommaso had gone to maintain their power and control. She found evidence of bribery, corruption, extortion, and even other murders, all carefully concealed, all meticulously documented in hidden files and secret accounts. The unraveling threads of deceit seemed endless, each discovery adding to the weight of the burden Aurora carried, each revelation deepening her understanding of the darkness that had permeated her family for generations. She realized that the trial of Tommaso Benedetti had been just the beginning, that there were many more battles to be fought, many more injustices to be addressed, many more secrets to be revealed. She also began to receive anonymous messages, cryptic notes, and veiled threats, suggesting that there were still powerful forces at play, individuals who were determined to protect their interests, to silence Aurora, to prevent the full truth from coming out. She knew that she was still in danger, that the fight was far from over, that the shadows of the past still loomed large. But she was not afraid. She had found her voice, her strength, her purpose. She had faced her demons, she had survived, she had emerged stronger, more determined, more committed to justice than ever before. She continued to work with Juliana and Marco, sharing her discoveries, seeking their advice, planning their next steps. They were a formidable team, united by their shared commitment to truth, to justice, to making Florence a better, safer, more equitable place. One evening, as Aurora was reviewing some old family documents, she stumbled upon a hidden compartment in her father's desk, a secret drawer that she had never noticed before. Inside, she found a small, leather-bound book, its pages filled with her father's elegant, spidery script. It was a diary, a personal journal that he had kept for many years, documenting his thoughts, his feelings, his fears, his secrets. Aurora hesitated, her hand hovering over the book, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that this was a private document, a glimpse into her father's innermost thoughts, a window into his soul. But she also knew that it might contain answers, clues, insights that could help her understand the past, that could help her unravel the remaining threads of deceit, that could help her bring closure to this chapter of her life. She opened the book, her fingers trembling slightly, and began to read. The words she found within would change everything again. Chapter 18. A Love Forged in Fire and Fear. Alessandro de Rossi's diary was a revelation, a window into a mind tormented by ambition, haunted by guilt, and burdened by the weight of a legacy built on lies and violence. He wrote of his love for Aurora's mother, a love that had been both passionate and destructive, a love that had led to betrayal, to loss, to a lifetime of regret. He wrote of Elena, of his conflicted feelings towards his illegitimate daughter, of his decision to conceal her existence, of his order to have her eliminated, a decision that had haunted him to his dying day. He expressed deep remorse, but justified his actions as necessary for the survival of the family, for the protection of his legitimate heir, Aurora. He wrote of Tommaso, of his trust in his loyal enforcer, of his reliance on Tommaso's strength, his ruthlessness, his unwavering obedience. He described Tommaso as a son, a confidant, a tool, a weapon. He acknowledged Tommaso's obsession with Aurora, but dismissed it as a harmless infatuation, a weakness that could be controlled, exploited. But it was the final entries in the diary that truly shocked Aurora, that shattered her understanding of the past, that forced her to reevaluate everything she thought she knew. Alessandro wrote of a growing suspicion, a nagging doubt about Tommaso's loyalty, a fear that his trusted enforcer had been manipulating him, using him, playing him for a fool. He described discovering evidence of Tommaso's secret dealings, his hidden alliances, his betrayal of the family's interests. He wrote of his realization that Tommaso had not only carried out his orders regarding Elena, but had also orchestrated the events, manipulated the circumstances, and profited from her death. He wrote of his plan to expose Tommaso, to bring him to justice, to reclaim control of his family, of his legacy. But he had run out of time. He was dying, his body weakened, his spirit broken. His final entry, written just hours before his death, was a desperate plea to Aurora, a warning, a confession, a request for forgiveness. "My dearest Aurora," he wrote, "if you are reading this, it means that I am gone, that I have failed to protect you, to guide you, to save you from the darkness that surrounds us. I have made many mistakes, many terrible choices, and I have paid the price. But you, my daughter, you can still choose a different path. You can still break free from the chains of the past. Trust no one, Aurora, especially not Tommaso. He is not what he seems. He is the serpent in the garden, the destroyer of all that is good and true. Find the truth, Aurora. Expose him.
Avenge Elena.
Avenge us all. And forgive me if you can." Aurora closed the diary, her hands trembling, her mind reeling, her heart aching with a mixture of grief, anger, and a strange, unsettling sense of understanding. Her father, the man she had both loved and feared, had been a victim as well, a pawn in Tommaso's twisted game, a man manipulated, betrayed, and ultimately destroyed by the very person he had trusted most. Tommaso was not just a murderer, a criminal, a loyal enforcer. He was a master manipulator, a puppet master, a serpent who had coiled himself around the de Rossi family, poisoning them from within, destroying them for his own gain. Aurora realized that she had underestimated Tommaso, that she had been blinded by her own emotions, by her own preconceived notions, by her own desire to find some semblance of humanity within him. She had been wrong. He was worse than she had ever imagined. He was the true architect of her family's downfall, the mastermind behind the web of deceit, the embodiment of evil. She knew that she had to expose him, to bring him to justice, not just for Elena, not just for her father, but for herself, for everyone he had hurt, for everyone he had betrayed. She shared the diary with Giuliana and Marco, revealing her father's final confession, exposing Tommaso's true nature, providing them with the final piece of the puzzle, the evidence they needed to bring him down once and for all. Giuliana was stunned, her initial reaction one of disbelief, followed by a surge of anger, a renewed determination to bring Tommaso to justice. Marco was equally shocked, his belief in Aurora's instincts, in her unwavering pursuit of truth, reaffirmed. They immediately launched a new investigation, focusing on Tommaso's financial dealings, his secret alliances, his manipulation of the de Rossi family. They discovered a vast network of corruption, stretching far beyond Florence, reaching into the highest echelons of power and influence. Tommaso, meanwhile, was awaiting his sentencing, confined to a prison cell, his power stripped away, his future uncertain. He had refused to cooperate with the authorities, maintaining his innocence, claiming that he was a victim of a conspiracy, a scapegoat for the de Rossi family's crimes. But his lies were unraveling, his defenses crumbling, his fate sealed. Aurora decided to visit him, to confront him one last time, to look him in the eye, to show him that she was not afraid, that she had uncovered his secrets, that she had defeated him. She obtained permission from Giuliana and arranged a meeting at the prison. She entered the visiting room, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands trembling slightly. Tommaso was brought in, handcuffed and shackled, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and despair. He looked at Aurora, a flicker of something that might have been surprise, or perhaps even admiration, crossing his face. "Aurora," he said, his voice low and hoarse. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I had to come," she said, her voice firm. "I had to see you. I had to tell you that I know. I know everything." She told him about the diary, about her father's final confession, about the new investigation, about the evidence that had been uncovered. His face remained impassive, his eyes betraying nothing. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable. You're lying, he said finally, his voice flat and emotionless. It's a trick.
A fabrication.
It's the truth, Tommaso, she said. And you know it. You've been exposed. You've lost. He laughed, a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed in the small room. You think you've won, Aurora?
He said.
You think this is over? You're wrong. It's never over. It's over for you, Tommaso, she said. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Your power is gone. Your secrets are revealed. Your reign of terror is over. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of hatred and something else. Something that looked almost like love. A twisted, possessive, destructive love, but love nonetheless. You could have been mine, Aurora, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We could have ruled together. We could have had everything. I would never have been yours, Tommaso, she said. I chose a different path.
Il chose truce. Il chose justice.
I chose freedom. She stood up, her gaze fixed on his, her voice unwavering. Goodbye, Tommaso, she said. She turned and walked away, leaving him alone in his prison cell, his dream shattered, his future bleak, his life in ruins. She felt no pity for him, no remorse, no regret. Only a sense of closure, of justice served, of a burden lifted. As she walked out of the prison, into the bright sunlight, she felt a sense of liberation, of peace, of a new beginning. The fire of adversity had forged within her a strength she never knew she possessed, a love for truth and justice that would guide her for the rest of her life. The fear that had once consumed her was gone, replaced by a quiet determination, a fierce resolve to live a life of her own choosing, a life free from the shadows of the past. And, despite everything, she acknowledged that it was her encounters with Tommaso, with darkness embodied, that had brought that about. It was a complex and unwelcome realization, but it was true. Chapter 19. The Dawn of a New Allegiance. With Tommaso's final conviction and sentencing, a new chapter began for Florence and for Aurora. The city, once shrouded in a veil of secrecy and fear, began to breathe again, its citizens emboldened by the exposure of the de Rossi family's crimes and the dismantling of their corrupt network. Aurora, now a symbol of hope and resilience, found herself at the forefront of a movement for change, a catalyst for reform, a voice for the voiceless. She dedicated herself to the foundation she had established in Elena's name, working tirelessly to support victims of violence, to provide educational opportunities, and to promote justice and equality. Marco continued to report on the unfolding events, his articles shedding light on the systemic corruption that had plagued Florence for decades, advocating for transparency, accountability, and reform. Juliana, having successfully prosecuted Tommaso and his accomplices, was hailed as a hero, her unwavering commitment to justice inspiring a new generation of lawyers and law enforcement officials. Isabella, freed from the shackles of her past, became Aurora's closest confidant and advisor, her wisdom and experience proving invaluable as they navigated the challenges of building a new future. The foundation flourished, attracting support from individuals and organizations across Italy and beyond. Aurora's story resonated with people from all walks of life, her courage and determination inspiring them to stand up for what they believed in, to fight for a better world. She traveled extensively, speaking at conferences, meeting with activists, sharing her story, and advocating for change. She became a powerful voice for justice, a beacon of hope for those who had suffered in silence, a symbol of the transformative power of truth. As Aurora embraced her new role, she also began to heal from the trauma of her past. The scars remained, a constant reminder of the pain she had endured, but they no longer defined her. She had found strength in her vulnerability, courage in her fear, purpose in her suffering. She continued to work as a book restorer, finding solace in the quiet solitude of her workshop, in the delicate task of preserving the past, of bringing old, forgotten stories back to life. It was a way for her to connect with her heritage, to honor the beauty and the artistry of her culture, to find peace in the midst of the chaos and the turmoil of her public life. She also began to explore new relationships, to open herself up to the possibility of love, of connection, of companionship. She had been so focused on justice, on exposing the truth, on fighting for change, that she had neglected her own personal needs, her own desire for happiness, for fulfillment. She met a man, an architect named Lorenzo, who was kind, compassionate, intelligent, and supportive. He was drawn to Aurora's strength, her resilience, her unwavering commitment to justice. He admired her courage, her passion, her determination to make a difference in the world. They began to spend time together, exploring Florence, sharing meals, engaging in conversations, discovering a shared love for art, for history, for the beauty of their city. Lorenzo was patient and understanding, giving Aurora the space she needed to heal, to process her emotions, to come to terms with her past. He did not pressure her. He did not judge her. He simply offered his support, his friendship, his love. Aurora found herself drawn to Lorenzo's warmth, his gentleness, his unwavering belief in her. He saw beyond her scars, beyond her public persona, beyond the trauma she had endured. He saw her for who she truly was, a woman of strength, of courage, of compassion, of resilience. Slowly, tentatively, Aurora began to open her heart to Lorenzo, allowing herself to feel again, to trust again, to love again. It was a gradual process, a delicate dance of vulnerability and courage, a journey of healing and self-discovery. She realized that she deserved happiness, that she deserved love, that she deserved to live a life free from fear, from guilt, from the shadows of the past. As their relationship deepened, Aurora found herself at a new crossroads, a moment of decision, a choice between the life she had known and the life she could create. She had built a new allegiance, a new family, a new community of support, based on trust, on respect, on shared values. She had found a new purpose, a new passion, a new direction for her life. She was no longer defined by her past, by her family's legacy, by the trauma she had endured. She was Aurora de Rossi, a woman of strength, of courage, of resilience, a woman who had faced her demons and emerged victorious. The dawn of a new allegiance had broken, illuminating her path, guiding her forward, filling her with hope, with possibility, with the promise of a brighter future. She knew that the challenges would continue, that the fight for justice was never truly over, but she was ready. She was no longer alone. She had found her voice, her strength, her purpose. And she was ready to embrace the future, whatever it may hold. The city of Florence, bathed in the warm glow of the rising sun, seemed to be cheering her on, celebrating her triumph, welcoming her into a new era of hope and renewal. It had not been an easy journey, and the scars remained. But she had grown, and in that growth, she had found a profound peace. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. Despite the peace Aurora had found, the specter of Tommaso Benedetti still lingered, a shadow in the corners of her mind. While he was incarcerated, his influence, though diminished, was not entirely extinguished. Whispers reached Aurora of attempts to appeal his sentence, of powerful allies still working behind the scenes, of threats veiled as legal maneuvers. She knew that, despite his imprisonment, the final confrontation was not truly over. There were loose ends, unanswered questions, and a lingering sense of unease that she couldn't shake. One day, a letter arrived. It was not delivered by the usual channels, but hand-delivered by a young man who quickly disappeared into the crowded streets of Florence. The paper was expensive, the handwriting familiar, though strained. It was from Tommaso. He requested a meeting. Not for an appeal to her sympathy, he wrote, but for a final reckoning, a clearing of the air, a chance to speak truths that had been buried beneath layers of deceit. He claimed he had information, secrets that even Aurora was unaware of, secrets that could impact her future and the future of Florence. Aurora was torn. Part of her wanted to dismiss the letter, to ignore his plea, to move on with her life and leave the past behind. But another part, the part that had always sought truth, that had always fought for justice, felt a compelling need to hear him out. She consulted with Marco and Giuliana. They were both vehemently opposed to the meeting, warning her of the dangers, the potential for manipulation, the risk of reopening old wounds. "He's playing you, Aurora," Marco argued. "He's desperate. He'll say anything to try and get out of prison." Juliana agreed. "There's nothing he can offer you that's worth the risk. He's a dangerous man, a convicted murderer. Let him rot in jail." But Isabella, surprisingly, offered a different perspective. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the only way to truly move on is to face your demons, to hear them out, to understand their motives. It doesn't mean you forgive them, but it can bring a sense of closure, a peace that you won't find any other way." Aurora weighed their advice, her heart torn between caution and curiosity, between fear and a deep-seated need for understanding. She knew that meeting Tommaso was a risk, but she also felt that it was a risk she had to take. She decided to meet him. She arranged the meeting through official channels, ensuring that it would take place in a secure environment, with guards present and with Juliana and Marco monitoring the situation from afar. The meeting was held in a small, sterile visiting room at the prison. Tommaso was brought in, his hands cuffed, his eyes devoid of their former fire, his face bearing the marks of his confinement. He looked at Aurora, a flicker of something that might have been sadness, or perhaps regret, crossing his face. "Aurora," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for coming." "Why did you want to see me, Tommaso?" she asked, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. He hesitated for a moment, then began to speak. He spoke of his childhood, of his upbringing in the shadow of the Derossi family, of his indoctrination into a world of violence, of loyalty, of obedience. He spoke of his relationship with Alessandro, of the trust that had been betrayed, of the manipulation that had led him down a path of darkness. He spoke of his obsession with Aurora, of his twisted love, of his desire to possess her, to control her, to make her a part of his world. He admitted his crimes, his guilt, his responsibility for Elena's death, for the pain he had caused, for the destruction he had wrought. But he also claimed that he had not acted alone, that there were others, powerful figures who had been pulling the strings, who had benefited from his actions, who were still at large. He named names, powerful names, individuals who had been considered untouchable, figures who had long been suspected of corruption, but who had always managed to evade justice. He provided details, dates, locations, evidence that could potentially implicate these individuals, that could expose a network of corruption that reached far beyond the Derossi family. Aurora listened intently, her mind racing, her heart pounding in her chest. She was skeptical, wary of his motives, but she also recognized a ring of truth in his words. She knew that he was a liar, a manipulator, a murderer, but she also sensed that he was telling the truth, at least this time. "Why are you telling me this, Tommaso?" she asked. "Why now?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of emotions. "Because," he said, "I'm tired of the lies. I'm tired of the secrets. I'm tired of being a pawn in someone else's game." He paused, then added, his voice barely a whisper, "and because I owe you the truth. You and Elena." The meeting ended, leaving Aurora with a torrent of conflicting emotions. She had heard his confession, his accusations, his final plea for something. Redemption? Understanding? She didn't know. She shared the information with Juliana and Marco. They were initially skeptical, but as they investigated Tommaso's claims, they began to uncover evidence that corroborated his story, that pointed to a wider conspiracy, a deeper level of corruption than they had ever imagined. The final confrontation, it turned out, was not just between Aurora and Tommaso, but between truth and power, between justice and corruption, between the past and the future. A new investigation was launched, a sweeping inquiry that targeted some of the most powerful figures in Florence, in Italy, and beyond. The whispers of rebellion had returned, stronger than ever, fueled by Tommaso's final act of defiance, his final attempt to break free from the chains of his past. Aurora found herself once again at the center of the storm, her courage and determination tested once more. But this time, she was not alone. She had allies, she had support, she had a clear path forward. She knew that the fight would be long and difficult, that there would be setbacks and dangers, but she was ready. She had faced her demons, she had spoken her truth, she had found her strength. And she would not rest until justice was served, until the final threads of deceit were unraveled, until the dawn of a new era, an era of transparency, accountability, and hope had truly arrived. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties had been waged, and Aurora, the woman who had once been a pawn, had emerged as a queen, a leader, a force for change. The city of Florence, bathed in the light of a setting sun, seemed to be holding its breath, awaiting the final outcome, the ultimate triumph of truth over lies, of justice over corruption. And Aurora, standing on the precipice of a new beginning, was ready to lead the way. Epilogue. Years passed. The sprawling investigations that stemmed from Tommaso's revelations led to a series of high-profile arrests, trials, and convictions. The old guard of Florence, the network of power and corruption that had held the city in its grip for so long, was finally dismantled. A new generation of leaders emerged, committed to transparency, accountability, and justice. Aurora remained at the helm of the Elena de Rossi Foundation, which grew into a powerful force for good, not only in Italy but internationally. It provided support for victims of violence, championed education and opportunity, and advocated for systemic change. Aurora became a globally recognized figure, her story a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. She and Lorenzo married, their love a quiet, steady flame that had been forged in the crucible of adversity. They built a life together, filled with love, laughter, and a shared commitment to making the world a better place. They adopted 2 children, a boy and a girl, offering them a home filled with warmth, security, and unconditional love. Isabella remained a cherished member of their family, a beloved grandmother figure to the children, a constant source of wisdom and support. She finally found peace, her past forgiven, her future bright. Marco continued his work as a journalist, his pen a powerful weapon against injustice, his voice a champion for the voiceless. He remained a close friend and confidant to Aurora, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced together. Giuliana Rossi rose through the ranks of the judiciary, becoming a symbol of integrity and unwavering commitment to the rule of law. She continued to mentor and inspire young lawyers, shaping a new generation of legal professionals dedicated to justice and equality. Tommaso Benedetti remained in prison, serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He never spoke publicly again, his secrets buried with him, his legacy one of darkness and betrayal. Occasionally, Aurora would think about him, not with hatred or anger, but with a strange sense of pity, a recognition of the wasted potential, the twisted path he had chosen. He had, in his own way, been instrumental in her transformation, a catalyst for change, a reminder of the darkness that lurked within humanity and the importance of choosing light. One sunny afternoon, Aurora found herself standing on the Ponte Vecchio, looking out over the Arno River. The city of Florence sparkled around her, vibrant, alive, and renewed. The scars of the past were still there, etched into the stones, woven into the fabric of the city's history, but they no longer defined it. Florence had healed, had grown, had transformed, just as she had. She thought of Elena, of her father, of Tommaso, of all those who had been caught up in the web of deceit and violence. She felt a sense of peace, of closure, of forgiveness. The past could not be changed, but the future could be shaped, molded, created anew. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes, a smile that reflected the joy, the love, the peace she had found. She had come a long way from the frightened, lonely woman who had once stood on the balcony of her small apartment, contemplating a life of escape and anonymity. She had faced her demons, she had spoken her truth, she had fought for justice, and she had won. She had found love, she had built a family, she had made a difference in the world. She turned and walked away from the bridge, her steps light, her heart full, her spirit soaring. The sun warmed her face, the breeze whispered through her hair, the city of Florence embraced her, welcoming her home. She was Aurora de Rossi, a woman of strength, of courage, of resilience, a woman who had found her voice, her purpose, her freedom. And her journey, though marked by pain and loss, had led her to a place of peace, of love, of enduring hope. The whispers of the past had faded, replaced by the vibrant symphony of a life lived fully, honestly, and with unwavering commitment to the truth. The cost of silence had been high, but the rewards of speaking out were immeasurable. And Aurora, the woman who had once been silenced, was now a voice for the ages.
The end.